In the last topic, we saw how if we have a function f of x is equal to x plus 5, then I can substitute numbers into that function. So in this case, f of 3 is equal to 3 plus 5 is equal to 8. So when I substitute 3 into my function, I get 8 out. Inverse functions is going the other way. So what would I have to do to 8 to get back to my original answer of 3? Now in this case, hopefully it's pretty obvious. You would just subtract 5. You do the opposite of this. The inverse function of x plus 5 is x minus 5. And we write the inverse function like this, f minus 1 of x. And it's x minus 5. So with simple functions like this, you can write down the inverse very easily. So let's just go through a few examples like that. So like I said, f minus 1 means the inverse function. So like I said, the opposite of x plus 5, the inverse of x plus 5 is x minus 5. The inverse of 3x, remember this means multiply the x by 3, so the inverse would be to divide the x by 3. This function here, x squared, the inverse of x squared is the square root of x. Now, getting a little bit more complicated now because we've got two things going on here. We are timesing the x by 2 and then adding 1. So it's sometimes useful to write these down in terms of a flowchart. So I'm timesing by 2 first, and then afterwards I'm adding 1. So if I'm going in reverse for the inverse, I want to subtract 1 first, and then divide by 2. So I would write that as x minus 1 divide by 2. If I've got a 3x minus 4, that's saying to times by 3 first, and then subtract 4 afterwards. If I want the inverse, going the opposite way now, I'm going to add 4 first, and then divide by 3. So I would write that as x plus 4 divide by 3. Here we've got x squared plus 5, so that would say to square the number first and then take away 5. So the inverse of that would be to add 5 first, so x add 5, and then square root it. Last example, there's quite a few things going on here. It's saying that the function we should square it, then times by 6, and then add 7. So it's saying to square the number, then times by 6, then add 7. If we're going in reverse, we want to take away 7 first of all, then divide by 6, and then square root. So I would write that as x minus 7 all divide by 6 square rooted, and that's the inverse function of that. So give you a couple, I'm going to do a couple for you, and then you're going to have to do a couple yourselves. So the first one, f of x is 3x minus 2, and I want to find the inverse of that. So 3x minus 2 means to times by 3 first, and then subtract 2 to get my answer. I want to go the other way, so I'm going to add 2 first, and then divide by 3. So I'm going to write that as x plus 2, so that's adding the 2, and then dividing by 3. So that's the inverse function of that. For this function over here, for the g of x is equal to 4x squared plus 5 divided by 3, that would be saying to square the number first, so x squared first, then times by 4, then I would add the 5, and then finally I would divide by 3. That would give me my answer, squaring first, then timesing by 4, then adding the 5, then dividing by 3. So in reverse, I would times by 3, I would subtract 5, I would divide by 4, and then I would square root. So I would write that down as 3 times x minus the 5, divide by the 4, then square root. So the whole idea of this topic is, if I was to substitute a number into this function here, get my answer, and then substitute it into the inverse function, because these are the inverses of each other, you would get back to where you started. You would get back to the same number. So for example, if I was to substitute, I don't know, let's say 7 into my function f, so if I was to do f of 7, get that answer and then substitute that in to the f inverse function, I would get back to 7. That's the idea of these inverse functions. They will cancel out the function itself. Similarly here, if I was to substitute any number into the inverse function, if I was to do the g inverse of a, whatever a is, get my answer, and then substitute that into the g function, the functions would just cancel each other out and I'd get back to a. Anyway, don't worry too much about that there. Make sure you can do this because there's a question for you to do. So press pause, have a go at these questions, and when you've got your answer, press play because I will show you them so you can see if you've got it right or not.